I didn't have this job when we were preparing to go to war in Iraq. When George W. Bush was assembling a coalition, it wasn't a complete success, was it? European allies, fellow members of the European Union, adopting completely different approaches to that. I wonder whether anyone would dispute that the French probably got it right on that front. I didn't have this job, so I don't have the sort of full palette of recollection. I don't know, and in fact my memory wouldn't be good enough to know whether or not, if we do a phone-in today, if we have a conversation together today about the mood, the noise, the tone of coverage of the current Israel-Iran conflict, whether or not you would hear echoes of conversations about US-Iraq from back in the day. I think I can hear some now. I think I can. I mean, certainly the very simple prospect of the United States going all in behind Israel would feel very much like the events of 2003. Operation Iraqi Freedom, it was called. The plan to remove Saddam Hussein's regime and address concerns about weapons of mass destruction. Donald Trump talking today about potentially removing the Ayatollah and weapons of mass destruction. In this case, nuclear weapons, which, as you know, if you listen to this programme, but you may not if you don't, or you haven't lately, you've been relying upon other outlets for your information. Benjamin Netanyahu personally has been claiming that Iran was on the brink of creating a nuclear bomb since 1992. And it doesn't mean that he's not telling the truth this time. It just means that he's got it wrong on countless occasions in the past. And, I mean, speaking of déjà vu, it's a little bit like Gaza already as well, isn't it? In that the conversation about the nuclear capability already seems to be in retreat. Happened very slowly in Gaza. I think the world was still primed slightly differently. You didn't have Donald Trump in the White House, most obviously. So Israel's insistence that it was interested only in punishing or eradicating Hamas and rescuing hostages held for quite a long time, even as the carnage they were inflicting on entirely innocent civilians began to rack up. An awful lot of effort, of course, put into telling you that you shouldn't believe the statistics, and of course enormous amounts of effort put into preventing journalists from Western news organisations to get in there to either check for themselves or send back pictures of what was actually happening, because most of us can still trust the evidence of our eyes and ears despite the effort put into dissuading us. But that has happened very quickly this time. Very little of the coverage this morning focuses upon the nuclear capability that was the original rationale for the attack. Issuing instructions to everybody in Tehran to get the hell out, making it clear perhaps that this is about destruction of as much as possible, as opposed to simply the removal of a mooted, shall we say, nuclear threat. No proof whatsoever that it is real, and indeed some grounds to believe that it is not. All of the inspections, all of the available evidence suggests not just that we can't prove that the nuclear capability is there, but worse, it suggests that the nuclear capability isn't any more than it was in 1992 or 2002 or 2012 or 10 past 2 yesterday or a year ago or the year before that. So this is the bit that I think speaks to the feeling of repetition. You've got Trump demanding an unconditional surrender by Iran. What does that even mean? You're under concerted attack from a neighbour, not unprovoked, because of course Iran has attacked Israel in the recent past. But in the context of the most recent events, the rationale seems to be that you're blowing up your neighbour's house because he might get a gun one day, and that. I suppose if you really stretch the terms of self-defence, you might just about be able to claim that is self-defence. But in the absence of evidence, and I keep coming back to that because that's what happened in Iraq, that they said and they were believed that weapons of mass destruction could be turned upon us at any point. Do you remember that? Not just that it was a weapon that could be turned upon Israel. Iraq, Saddam Hussein was in possession of weapons that could be directed at us, that could be fired at the West. You may have forgotten some of the detail. But you'd think they'd be able to provide the proof, given the extent of the... In fact, when you look at what Trump has said lately, we know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is. I find myself having to double down and stress to you, this is real. This is the President of the United States of America. This is not a parody account or a Saturday Night Live skit or a hoax or somebody who's very cleverly put together something on social media that looks official but isn't. This is the real deal. This is the man who, of course, promised that there'd be no new wars on his watch. And he has posted this in the last few hours. We know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding. He is an easy target, but is safe there. We are not going to take him out, brackets, kill, exclamation mark, close brackets, at least not for now. But we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. Thank you for your attention to this matter, exclamation mark. Just to digress slightly, I want to do a phone-in on why he keeps putting thank you to your attention to this matter at the end of his post. I've got all sorts of theories about this. I think he thinks it makes him sound like a grown-up. I think, and I suspect that some of his fans, it makes them feel like they're somehow part of... Thank you for your attention to this matter. It makes them feel like they're in the room where it happens. Or there could be another reason. But it's absolutely pathetic. Thank you for your attention to this matter on a bloody tweet or whatever you call posts on social media. It's extraordinary, but it's far from the most extraordinary thing about this message, because if they possess the technology to know exactly where the Ayatollah is hiding, you'd think they'd be able to establish whether or not Iran is upon the brink of producing a nuclear bomb. Look, call me, I don't know, call me what you want. Call me Al. You can call me Al. But if your intelligence operation is so complete and so impressive that you can actually claim to know, and presumably do know, where the Ayatollah is hiding, where the supreme leader is hiding, then you probably could find a whopping great nuclear bomb in the same territory, right? I don't know. Maybe they're tiny these days. Maybe the facilities that you need to create a nuclear bomb are a fraction of the size of one human being, of one Ayatollah. But I don't... And again, you know, I say this stuff and I think, as it comes out of my mouth, that it's blindingly obvious. But maybe there's something I don't understand here. Maybe it's all buried in an enormous hole, in which case you'd wonder, why isn't the Ayatollah hiding there? So you've got a bomb and you've got a bloke, right? They know exactly where the bloke is, but they can't show you the bomb. Which means that the bloke is very stupid, because if he really wants to hide from them, he'd be hiding where the bomb is. Unless there is no bomb. In which case there's no justification for these attacks, which is very similar to what happened in 2003. And we all know how that ended. Pick your favourite. ISIS, maybe? Absolute carnage, chaos in Iraq. And the rationale I had at the time was so wrong. My rationale at the time, and this is me being very honest with you because I didn't have this job, so I don't have to admit it, but my rationale at the time was, if you've got 10 murderous despots lined up against the wall and you've only got one bullet, what are you going to do? So there was a lot of whataboutery, which looks a lot more valid now than it did to me back then. And it would say, why are we going after Saddam Hussein when, for example, the 9/11 bombers were mostly Saudi Arabian? It's actually a very good question. Unfortunately, the answer is pretty flippin' obvious. Why are we going after Saddam Hussein and not going after, and then insert your sort of despotic regime of choice at this point? And rather than actually trying to work out proper answers to those questions, which is what I would do now in your company and what we will do today with whatever questions we end up asking, rather than trying to actually answer those questions, I came up with this slightly crass gimmick. If you've got one bullet, maybe I nicked it off someone else. I don't know. Maybe this is what the government was touting at the time, or what George W. Bush was suggesting. You've only got one bullet and you've got 10 murderous dictators lined up against the wall. What are you going to do? Of course you're going to shoot one. Well, then, of course, you've got no bullets. Strange, right? So, how... Is that the question we should ask? I mean, is this all beginning to look very 2003? With a side order of Gaza, actually. With a side order of claiming originally that you have to do this in order to do that. You have to do this in order to achieve that. You have to do X in order to achieve Y. But then once the die has rolled or the clock has ticked or the page has turned, you're still doing X, and you're no longer claiming that the intention is to achieve Y. 50-odd thousand people dead, and no one really talks anymore about the rationale for the war being to destroy Hamas or rescue the hostages, something that the hostages' families stopped believing a long time ago. So, I mean, is this the question, do you think? Have we learned nothing? Have we learned nothing? 03456060973 is the number that we need. I'm 53 years old, so I was 30. Was I 30? No, I wasn't. In 2003, 22 years. Yeah, I was about 30, give or take. And I just started being paid for my opinions. But I didn't really have the knowledge that I needed on this because I didn't know who to trust. Lots of people said there aren't any weapons of mass destruction, but there must have been at some point, because we know that Saddam Hussein had used them against his own people. And yet I've got the name Hans Blix bobbing around in my brain, who was the United Nations weapons inspector, but I'm afraid I can't completely recall his relevance to the conversation. But that's what we do, isn't it, in the West? We justify attacks upon the East, upon the Middle East. And in a sense, Israel is a Western country in the context of this observation, not geographically, but geopolitically. It's not just the Eurovision Song Contest. I think that the point extends a little further than that. You have this sense that they soften the public up for war, the American public. I think it would be less successful this time round with the British public, but who knows? You soften the public up for war by positing an epic threat, either to an ally or to yourselves. The weapons of mass destruction, I am 99% sure, were described as being aimed at us. I've got the idea that there was a 20-minute claim at some point. That's not happening here. But the idea that the nuclear bomb that Iran is in possession of, or will imminently be in possession of, but which nobody could prove, is the reason why Iran is now facing the kind of obliteration that Gaza has endured. Or why, depending on which story you want to focus on first, why Donald Trump is considering joining forces with Israel, or why the residents of Tehran have been instructed to get out, or why Trump is demanding an unconditional surrender, or why the traffic coming out of Tehran is now stretching for miles as thousands flee, or why rescuers are currently sifting through the remains of a residential area of the city, or why the state broadcaster has been hit. How does hitting, unless they're hiding a bomb in the studio, why are they attacking the state broadcaster? And I don't know whether these questions are the right questions to be asking. I don't know whether you can answer that, actually, with a straight face. The reason why a mission to reduce or remove Iran's nuclear capability involves attacking the state broadcaster is ... Maybe there is an answer to that question. And maybe this headline is wrong. Destruction, not reform, is Netanyahu's ultimate goal. Israel, and this was an interview that he gave to Fox News, perhaps inevitably at the weekend, Israel would not simply dismantle Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs, but usher in regime change in Tehran. And that's where perhaps the echoes of Saddam Hussein in 2003 become loudest. That's the question. Are we just doing the same thing again, or does this feel different to you? Very gratifying. Phone in on Monday. The cleverest question we asked by some distance was, what is life like in Iran in 2025? I don't think we could have done that in 2003 with regard to Iraq. I don't think I'd have got the calls. I don't even know whether you'd have been able to listen to me in Iraq if I'd been on the radio in 2003. Would there have been enough Iraqis here to conduct that conversation? Maybe there would. I don't know. But we probably wouldn't have had enough listeners in total. Well, we do now. Is this very, very similar? Is it beginning to look a lot like 2003? Or can you persuade me that it's not? convince me that it was 45 minutes? You're absolutely right, Ray, not 20 minutes. It was the dodgy dossier, and there you go. It's not just me. Ray says, I was thinking exactly the same thing this morning. And actually, speaking of great minds, Lauren asks this question: when has regime change ever been to our benefit? I don't know, actually, is the answer to that. I nearly asked that question at the top of the show today. I was going to be specific to the Middle East. I was thinking most obviously of Afghanistan and Iraq. And then of Syria. But that was an organic regime change. That came from within, not from without. The arguments that we should have helped began to look a little... Well, I don't know. We don't need to overcomplicate the questions we're already asking. Is this beginning to look to you a lot like 2003 when, I think it's fair to say, I don't want to say warmongers or hawks, but the supporters of that war have been found rather wrong by history?